listening to Para X.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, Merry Meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. Now, my opening song tonight was Brigid by our friend Lisa Thiel. And no opening song could be more appropriate because my guest tonight is author Courtney Weber, and we're going to be talking about the goddess Brigid, or Breed, and we'll get into that in a minute, and her new book, Brigid, History, Mystery, and Magic of the Celtic Goddess. Now, Courtney is a Wiccan priestess, a writer, tarot advisor, teacher living in New York City. She runs open events in Manhattan and teaches workshops on witchcraft from coast to coast, and she's the high priestess of Novices of the Old Ways, a progressive Wiccan and pagan group based in New York City and Portland, Oregon. And she also runs a lunar temple coven, which serves as the central core of Now, providing intense witchcraft study, votary training, and ritual planning for Now's open Sabbaths. So, Courtney, welcome, and thank you for joining me this evening.
Thank you, Marla. It's quite a pleasure, and I hear that we have quite a wide audience from a lot of different parts of the world, and that's very exciting, and I'm glad to be in everybody's presence.
It's always a good thing. You know, when I got your book in the mail from the publisher, I couldn't wait to get you booked for this show because the goddess is the one that I most resonate to. And interestingly enough, here's the tie-in. Lisa Thiel, who wrote and sang the opening song, has been on my show a couple of times. And last time she was on talking about both her music and her art, one of her collections is the Goddess Collection. And off mic, I mentioned to her that I was particularly drawn to the painting she did of Brigid. And a few days later, I received a huge print in the mail, which I adore. Oh. So when I got your book, it just seems like everything keeps falling into place with the goddess. So let's talk about, because I'm saying Brigid and Breed and blah, 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 blah. Let's talk about the fact that she's called by 1,000 different names and none of them is wrong,
true.
Right?
No, it's true. And in fact, that was the first challenge I had with the book. But it also was the piece that helped me really understand where her origins came from, was in her name. So it's really interesting as you're pointing that out, that she's called by 100 different names, and that's true, and it's always been true. Before we started, you and I were discussing whether she's called Brige or Brigid or Brigitte, and I've always called her Brige, or have for the last few years, and it really wasn't until I was writing this book and talking about her publicly that I just started calling her Brigid more often, because that's how she's very widely known, and it's not an anomaly to say it that. I mean, there's no really way for me to know if Brige is actually the one of the more correct versions. And so I guess to put out there that I don't really have the authority to say that any of them are right or wrong. Mm-hmm. But Brigid seems like the easiest one for me to say publicly, but privately and in ritual, I usually refer to her as Brige.
Mm-hmm. And especially for people that know her as Saint Brigid. You know, there's just, here's the thing, there's so many things to talk about in the book, and I'm not sure where to begin, but this is all part of it. It may be a good place to start about her different incarnations, because she's kind of across the board in many traditions. I mean, some people believe she's the Celtic goddess, some people believe she's the Irish saint, and then there's the Caribbean voodoo deity as well. And so I think, the best place to start, names aside, is who is she and how did she come to mean so much to so many different groups of people and in so many guises?
Well,
that's a loaded question.
Yeah, it's a big question. But as we were saying, it really comes down to about her name and the root of Brigid. Also Brigantia and Brigitte. However, she was called throughout the ancient Celtic world. The B-R-I-G is really meant the great lady or the exalted one. And the ancient Celtic world was full of animism. Every living thing had a spirit. Every well, every lake, every river, every tree, every area of land, every animal, every part of the earth was its own living conscious entity. And that entity was always referred to as female. So if you think about it, if someone was saying like Brige of the well, what they really were saying was the lady of the well, and that meant the incarnate spirit of that well. So over time, the word Brige or the lady became a name in its own right. So here was this goddess who really was like the lady of all these things, and now she was Brigid. And that's why one of the reasons why she has such a diverse area of patronage, from smith working to childbirth, mean, those are the things we wouldn't naturally put together, yet those are two things that are very, very, very paramount to her areas of worship.
Yeah.
So that's, I was struggling so much in the beginning of this journey with trying to figure out who the quote unquote real Brige was. And I was chasing down Brigantia, like all these different titles for Brigid. And she was this warrior goddess of sovereignty in the land in Celtic Britain. Meanwhile, she was the goddess of the cows and the bards in Ireland. And there were myths that Brigid actually was English originally and came to Ireland with the refugee druids when the Romans came in. Some people said that Brigid was already in Ireland when the British druids showed up. It was just a very complicated, confusing thing. And then I was just so on the verge of just pulling my hair out. I went to bed, and just as I'm about to go to sleep, it all clicked that there was no point in trying to chase the true identity, because really her identity was in the name and however the name was used in that part of the world. And there's still a lot of that in the world today. When I was doing my research for the book, I got to go to magical places in Wales and England in addition to Ireland. And one of the places I went to was this little tiny village called Chelvey in England. And they have an 1,100-year-old Norman cathedral dedicated to St. Brigid. And I went in, and everything was decorated with St. Brigid crosses and images of wheat. And I asked the church warden, why wheat? Because I only know her to be a goddess of cheese and milk. And she said, well, we're a community of wheat farmers, so St. Brigid is the patroness of wheat.
Okay.
Yeah, so and even in that place, she was embodying the spirit of what made the land alive. Mm-hmm. And so I think in a deeper than just even, she's the goddess of cows. It's like, well, in an area where people rely on cows and cattle for their livelihood, she is the spirit of what's keeping that place afloat.
Right. Yeah, and that makes good sense.
Mm-hmm.
There are those who see gods and goddesses only as mythical beings, while they consider saints as those who lived human lives. Now, she's considered both a saint and a goddess. It's really hard to justify, isn't it, sometimes?
A little bit, and there's a couple of reasons why that happened. As most people that are familiar with Celtic Christianity or neo-paganism, that a lot of at least the Irish gods were turned into saints or demons when Christianity settled into the region. And Brigid was one of those. But she also was considered, she may have been a leading druidess of a perpetual shrine in Kildare, Ireland, and that she actually converted the shrine herself to a Catholic church. I think that's one of the places where the name again comes in, because Brigid may not have originally been a woman's name, but more of a title, as in to say the Brigid of Kildare or the leading lady of Kildare. Mm-hmm. So mortal women were called Brigids too if they had a position of power. There was one very, very famous lawyer in Celtic Ireland, or ancient Celtic Ireland, that she was called Brigid. And that was, people are pretty sure that was not her birth name, but rather because she was a lady of the law, she would be called the Brigid. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't bother me that the goddess is also a saint, because also she's the most unsaintly goddess of any I've ever heard of. Saint Brigid was one who was best known for challenging church leaders. And I actually was on a committee for a couple of years to save a historic Irish famine cathedral here in New York City. It was St. Brigid's Church. And we succeeded. We were able to win it back from the archdiocese, who had plans to knock it down and turn it into condos. And for those of you that are living overseas, the United States doesn't have a lot of old stuff anymore. The stuff that existed before the Europeans came, most of it is gone. And and the people of European descent have been here for such a short time. Things that we've built, are very, very precious to us if it's been around for a while. And St. Brigid's Cathedral predates the American Civil War, and it's very important to us, and the church wanted to knock it down. But we succeeded, and on the night of its reconsecration mass, I was crammed in the back of the cathedral next to this man who was from Ireland. And he turned to me and he asked me in his brogue, what was St. Brigid known for? And I turned to him and I said, telling the Catholic Church where to go. And he laughed so hard, because that's exactly what we had done, as the Committee to Save St. Brigid's Church had basically said a few nasty words to the Archdiocese of New York and actually won back our church. So...
Yeah, I always think it's really sad, I mean, in this country that we don't, I mean, we have history, we can't say we don't, but in Europe, 500, 600, 700 years is nothing. Here,
exactly.
150 years, it's like, oh my God, let's tear it down.
Don't touch it.
I just, it's so sad. It really is sad that we don't have that reverence to the past as they do in Europe. All right, so let me. There was a story in your book that I really liked, and I want to talk about that. Now, in general, working with gods and goddesses can be tricky at times, and you found out when you made a promise to Brigid about writing a book that you had to put off or forgot about, and it came back to bite you in the butt, didn't it?
Oh, it did. I was in college, and I was just starting to explore witchcraft, and I was really struggling with writing a short story for my fiction writing class. It seems so silly now why I let this short story just torture me so much, but I really wanted to do well in the class, because I decided in my final term of my senior year that writing was what I wanted to do, not theater, which is what I had been studying for. And somehow I really needed to make it well in this one class if I was going to be a writer at all. And I couldn't get a story together to save my life. It wasn't working out. And so I lit a candle to Brigid one night and I said, if you will help me write this short story, I'll write a book for you. And the next day, as I told people, it was like the beginning of Star Wars. It was almost like I was seeing exactly what needed to happen on the screen in front of my head. And I just started writing, and it really clicked. The professor said I had a gift, talent, should be teaching the class, and that it got published and I got nominated for awards. And I thought, that's it. My fiction writing career is off and running. I'm going to be the next Dan Brown, because that's who was really popular back then. And I could not write at all after that, because I forgot to write that book for Brigid. Or rather, I tried a couple of times. I guess in my mind, I thought it was just going to be a book of poems that I would write about how awesome she was, and I'd leave it on my altar, and that's going to be my gift. And I couldn't do it. And I felt so ashamed. Now I realized that wasn't the book she wanted. She really wasn't no interest in my terrible poetry. And instead, she really, really wanted me to go on this crazy journey. And I couldn't get published anywhere. I couldn't even write. Sometimes I would sit down and try to put a story together, and just nothing would come out. It's just like the words are dog paddling around the page. And it just kind of wandered around, the East Coast and the world for a little while, and, trying to gain all this experience to write about it, and nothing would work. And I'd forgotten all about this book. And then throughout different rituals, if the goddess would come through somebody, their first question to me was, where's the book? And I was convinced that this was era of Da Vinci Code and Secrets of the Vatican and stuff like that. I was convinced that there was already a book in existence that would explain the links between paganism and Christianity, and that it was locked away in the Vatican library, and that I had to go find it myself. So I was planning to move to Rome and get a job at the Vatican as a security guard, and I was going to steal this book, whatever it was. I mean, it was very strange. I look back, I'm like, oh God, I was not sleeping enough back then. And it's so horrible. And then, I was, everything I tried to do just wouldn't work. I could not, I had an okay job, but it kept me fed, but just barely. My relationships just were a disaster. Like, putting Carrie Bradshaw to shame. And I tried to go to grad school, and I couldn't make it work. I was able to turn in good homework, but the money was either money or it was schedule or something just wasn't working, and I just could not get my life to move forward until it was one late summer. I went to an ecstatic ritual in upstate New York and was dancing around with a bunch of witches in the vineyard for a while. And the high priest put his hand on the high priestess's head. She starts convulsing like she's having a seizure. She sits down on the couch. She grabs me and pulls me over, and she sits down. She looks at me and she says, "You know, you made a promise to me and you didn't keep it. And that's why I keep wrecking your life." And all of a sudden I went, "Oh crap." I just had this flashback of being in college and making this half-hearted promise in my bedroom. And I went, "Oh, this makes total sense. I've really screwed up." And she said, "And I'm going to continue to screw your life up until you get this done." And I went, "All right." So the next week I went back to grad school and tried one more time to make it work, and spoke to every single dean asking if there's any way they could change the schedule, give me some more money, anything that can happen. Nothing was going to work. And so I finally withdrew from school that day. And I marched to the library, because I could still use my library card, went up to the 5th floor, which was their attic, dusky back room. At the very, very last shelf, there was one book about Brigid, Goddess and Saint by Brian Wright. And I took it out and I said, well, I'm going to write this book, and hopefully I'll re-enroll in grad school next year when I figure out all this crap. And I started writing the book that day. And I never went back to grad school. But now I have a book.
And you don't have to keep looking over your shoulder, right?
I don't have to keep looking over my shoulder, and I'm engaged to be married, and I have a job that I love. So I hope I don't sound like one of those come to Jesus people, live my story and live like me, but that's what happened. I made a promise. That's the thing is people I don't think understand about witchcraft. It's not Amazon.com of the gods. You don't just say, give me this, I'm going to light this candle, and then you're just going to give me what I want. No, it is a contract you make with the universe, because the gods want things out of you just like you want things out of them. And so you've got to pay your bills with the gods, and those bills can be very heavy and complicated sometimes. All I wanted was one short story, but one of the blessings of Brigid is that she gives you things you didn't even know you wanted. I didn't know I wanted to write about witchcraft. I didn't know I wanted to write about spiritual matters, and it turns out that's really what I did want to write about. I don't have the desire to write fiction that I did once before, which may change, but I'm so much happier writing this. It comes to me naturally, whereas fiction was such an uphill battle, and I felt like one person that was in this giant sea of other. It felt basically like auditioning for Broadway and theater. Whereas now it's like I feel comfortable in this world. I understand this world, and I have some sort of success in it. And that was really because I made right with the promises I made to Brigid. And she did reward me in full and continues to pound me on her anvil repeatedly. But I think any decent God will do that to us because they want us strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they want us to be strong. They want us to be successful. And, I mean, they're very generous in that. But see, this is why some people don't work with gods and goddesses. They're afraid. They think that something really bad is going to happen. For those who don't but want to, I mean, what would you suggest they do to begin? How do you acquaint yourselves with them? How do you open up a dialogue, so to speak?
Do you mean with any gods or goddesses or just Brigid?
Well, it's probably similar across the board, but we're talking about Brigid. Let's go with her. Well,
it's such it's something I don't always know how to articulate, because I've been saying my prayers since as long as I can remember. I grew up in a Christian home, and we would pray over dinner, and we'd say our prayers before we go to bed at night. And, we'd pray in church and stuff like that. So I grew up being taught how to channel my thoughts and focus and desires to a disincarnate being. But I remember years later, someone came to me and she said, I don't know how to pray. And I didn't know how to tell her. It's almost like someone said, I don't know how to breathe. And I'd say, but just inhale. And she says, but I don't know how to do that. And So it is tough when you say, how do you do it? And I think the journey of being in touch with any moment in the divine is unique to all of us. What I said to that young woman when she asked me this is I said, how do you know when you're in the presence of the divine? And she said, well, I don't know. Well, a couple of days before, actually about a week and a half before that, she had a profound moment in the woods. We were down in Delaware doing some work on our friend's property, and this young woman was always attracted to butterflies. Now, we're in New York City, so there aren't a whole lot of butterflies around, but wherever she would always end up she would draw butterflies, not even meaning to. She might be standing next to a poster with a butterfly on it. People would give her butterflies. People associated her with the creature. And while we were down in Delaware, I saw her standing there by a tree, and she was looking at her wrist, and a little monarch had settled on her wrist and was flapping its wings gently. Mm-hmm. And she looked at it, and she was so at peace with that butterfly. And then when the butterfly flew away, she just burst into tears. And it was just these tears of absolute joy. And I said, what was happening to you when that happened with the butterfly? And she said, I can't explain it. And I said, I think that was you in touch with the divine. Mm-hmm. And it's like, can you go back into that space? Or can you, if you can't go into it in your presence, can you call out to it in your mind? As though you're calling out into a clearing in the forest. And call that sense back into you. Call back to that butterfly that landed on your wrist and call it back into your present, into your mind. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to identifying with specific gods or goddesses, like when people say, how do you connect with Brigid? I feel like I want to connect with her, but I don't know if she wants me to or if she's really reaching out. I mean, Brigid is the most inclusive goddess that I've ever experienced. She wants everybody in the room. I've only heard of one person that she really wasn't that fond of. It was very funny because he, to me, seemed like the stereotypical Celtic man. He's like, I just don't get along with her. But everybody else I've ever met, I want to say that if you're feeling curious about her, chances are she's already calling to you. And the simple way to be in touch with her is to simply leave out a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a glass of seltzer water or something that you might offer a guest when they walk into your house. Because Brigid's essence is so very much about hospitality. And simply say the words, Brigid is welcome, which sounds so simple, but that is how Brigid has been summoned for thousands of years. And Brigid is come, Brigid is welcome is one of the oldest Imbolc blessings that exists. So even saying that within your home, and you're inviting her presence right in there.
That's a good idea. And, you just mentioned leave out a cup of tea and something, which is a sort of offering. But I want to talk about offerings in general, because people don't realize necessarily that it's not only impolite, but counterproductive to call upon a deity to assist us and not give something back in return, something tangible. And, I know you can go on the internet and find all these lists. Well, for this one you do this, and for this one you do that. But, the main thing is that what you give is just as important as the giving. It's like you have to show that you're serious, I think, rather than just, I'm going to call on Brigid and she's going to help me. Well, you've already explained that she's good at kicking butt. But is there certain things in particular that if you're asking for something from her, that you would leave out for her?
My coven is really, really fond of leaving her Guinness and whiskey. Mm-hmm. We find that Oh yeah. If you crack open a Guinness and you ask her for something, chances are good she's going to work with you on it. Not only is it an Irish beer, but she's also a patroness of beer. That was one of the things that she was well known for, and so she's. I think that's always a good thing to do. I know one year I was doing an Imbolc ritual at my home. I was living here in Inwood, which is upper Manhattan in a mostly Dominican neighborhood. And I was getting ready to celebrate Imbolc, and about 10 minutes before my guests arrived, there was a knock on the door. And it was an old man selling flan. And for those of you that aren't familiar, flan is a custard. And at first I sent him away because I was like, oh, I don't need flan. Then I went, wait a minute. That's what Brigid ordered. And I'd never seen that man, and I never saw anybody selling pastries in the building again. So I called him back. I'm like, venga, yo quiero. And I bought one. And that ended up being I was like, I think that this must be what she wants. I mean, it's milk-based. It's a custard. This is very, very Imbolc. So, yeah, don't be afraid to mix a couple of cultures there. She's really, really adventurous and not much, and likes whatever's good in the neighborhood. She'll be happy to have it. But especially anything, because she's so closely associated with dairy products, I'd say cheese, milk, butter, cream, any sort of custard, especially if it's, I think because of her connection to house and home, if your family has a recipe using one of these things, even if your family is not Celtic, and maybe even especially if your family is not Celtic, I would leave that out because I think she would appreciate the connection from your family heritage and say, hey, my family makes flan. Maybe you'd like a slice. Oh, she'll show up for that big time. Mm-hmm. So
it all works. It's just kind of good to know what you need to have on hand just in case, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but you know what? And also, just so that people know, Brigid is not picky when it comes to what you offer. If you have nothing but your willing heart, that she'll take the willing heart. Also offering song. She loves song, loves singing, loves dance. If you're a poet, I am not, but if you're a poet, a piece of poetry will always be welcome. She's also the goddess of poets and bards. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So all of these little pieces.
That makes it so easy, doesn't it? Basically, it does.
It does. No excuses, people. Or no excuses.
None at all. All right, so the other thing that she's known for is healing, amongst all the other things. But I think that's a big one. And I want to talk about that for a minute, and then I actually have a question from chat in regards to that. So let's talk about her healing.
Okay. I feel that her connection with healing is really rooted in her connection to water, as in the Brigid of the well, the Lady of the Well, the spirit of the well. The Celtic world is home to thousands of natural freshwater wells, and in a time period when you couldn't just turn on the tap and get clean water, that you had to wait for the rain, or even better, you could find a natural well. That was life-saving, and having access to clean water and basic sanitation is a couple of the cornerstones of health. So someone just even bathing themselves and drinking fresh water could improve their health drastically, which is how they became known as healing wells, and therefore people would make pilgrimages to them and pray for healing, which then caused their power to increase. So over hundreds or thousands of years of people making these journeys to pray to these wells, they became healed by them. And then these wells, which were dedicated to Brigid and then later Saint Brigid, that enhanced her connection to healing. So yes, she is a goddess of the healing work. I know a few years ago, my coven and I had a friend who was dealing with a medical condition. She had discovered, her doctor had discovered precancerous cells on her cervix. Mm-hmm. And she wanted us to do a healing for her. So we did a Brigid rite where we charged a goblet of apple juice, and with Brigid's healing water, with Brigid's healing powers, we were chanting for Brigid, and when the energy had raised to a point we felt satisfied, we directed all that energy into the cup. And then as she drank it, the intention was not to just send warm healing energy toward her afflicted area, because that can sometimes actually work against you, but to wash it out of her system, like the healing waters of Brigid's well washing away the illness. She went home that day, and the next morning she ran to the ER because she thought she was having a hemorrhage.
Mm-hmm.
When they examined her, though, they said, no, this isn't a hemorrhage. You're just shedding some cells.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of weeks later, she went back to be examined again, and they found that all those precancerous cells were gone.
Nice.
So, yeah, so there's something to this. There is something that maybe it is a profound coincidence, and if so, then that's wonderful, because the point of the story is that this woman has not dealt with this issue since then, knocking on my wooden head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but there's a reason why people continue to pray to Brigid and do work with Brigid for healing, because things like this do happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And along those lines, I've got a question from Tabby, and she said, would you consider Brigid to have the ability to remotely send messages or heal someone over a distance? I'm thinking what she means is maybe, like we do with Reiki and stuff.
Well, Brigid, I can't.
Like maybe if we're asking for someone else,
okay.
okay, I know somebody on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast. Could I ask for help for that person, and could Brigid heal? That's the way I'm interpreting it.
Yes, and I would agree, because we may be remote, but Brigid's not. So she can be the gods can be anywhere at any time. They don't have to travel. They just already are. In fact, I did hear of a Brigid healing that was remote. It was, I think they're maybe about 20, 30 miles away. And one woman was in the hospital, and her coven gathered, again, about 30 miles from the hospital to do a healing ritual on her, and using Brigid in order to send that energy. And it's kind of like they reenacted what was going on in her hospital room within their ritual space, and was directing to Brigid, here's where we want the healing, here's what we want to have done to her and make our friend whole again. Without knowing what they were doing, she had asked for healing, but she didn't know how it was going to be done. The friend who was in the hospital had a dream of what was happening in the ritual. Now, she knew they were going to do it, but she didn't know what they were going to do. But she dreamed exactly what they ended up doing. She woke up, she wrote it down, she called the next day and she said, this is what I dreamed you all did. And they all freaked out, because it is exactly what they did, using Brigid as an energy, as the energy and as the healer in it. And she has a chronic condition, but she healed quickly from the bout of it and was out of the hospital not too long after that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, because as you mentioned in the book, Earth goddesses have a penchant for working with animals. And we're all very animal oriented around here. And and you have a section in the book about finding your Brigid spirit animal. It's kind of like a guided meditation, and it's really quite simple, and yet it's not quite the same thing as like finding your animal totem. Or at least that's how I interpreted it. This is more like during, and correct me if I'm wrong, like during the meditation, an animal comes to you and it asks you questions, you speak to it, and in the end you record your thoughts and your visions. So, and also I kind of felt that at the same time, the same animal may not come each time you do this. I kind of got the impression that the animal you need to come to you will, because each time you ask for it, things are different in your life. So, even from one minute to the next, and the animals, like many spirit guides, probably all fit different purposes. So, does that make any sense? Did I get any of it right?
Then that's what I believe. And animal spirits, so far as I understand them, as experience them, are just a very, very deep personal journey. And I think that where a lot of us go wrong with understanding the messages from animals is that we pick up a book on the animal and we treat it like an encyclopedia or a Bible. And it's like, well, the appearance of a hawk is going to mean sharp-sightedness. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, hawks have sharp-sightedness, but to me, hawk doesn't mean sharp-sightedness. Hawk means community. Because there's a red-tailed hawk refuge not too far from where I live. And my coven, we've had some very profound moments with red-tailed hawks even here in Manhattan. So for us, the red-tailed hawk symbolizes urban community. But that's not going to necessarily mean what it means for someone who's listening to this, say, in Florida or Michigan, where a red-tailed hawk is going to have a completely different meaning for them. Maybe it's community, maybe it's not. And but what I feel like when working with, I feel like the gods do maneuver our journey so that animals will appear to us at specific times in order for us to pay attention to something. And with working with Brigid, because she does have relationships with animals, if we come across an animal she has a relationship with while we're working with her, she may want to inform us about something. One of the things that was interesting to me is that I learned that Brigid was often associated with bees. And I had no idea, but that's because bees were considered musical. And Brigid being the patroness of bards, why wouldn't she have a connection with the musical creature? And also the bees' production of honey, similar to the sheep's production of milk, both two really, really important parts of agriculture. We need the honey and the milk. So when I take that, I interpret that as if someone who's working with Brigid, say, comes across a hive of bees. Bees for a lot of people mean cooperation. They mean rulership when you think of the queen bee. And they can also mean fragility when you're thinking about environmental sensitivities. Bees are so important to us. But I would like to add that if you're working with Brigid and you come across bees, it may be a sign it's time for you to be working on your innate artistic talents, because the bees are the creators in Brigid's world. And, they're also the producers. It's like, it's time, and they do work well together. So I would say to start working on your gifts to produce them the way that bees produce honey. So the exercise, and the exercise in there is because, unfortunately, I'm thinking about people like me that live in the city who aren't able to come across a white horse on a regular basis. But maybe Brigid wants to show us a white horse so that we can be reminded that we're strong and we can leave behind the dangers of our own personal winters, the way that she rides the white horse away from Ben Nevis every Imbolc day, and the Kaliak chases behind her. So in doing that exercise, it leaves the door open so that Brigid can show us the animals that it just may be really difficult for we urban creatures to run into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important. I mean, everybody, even people say, well, I can't do that. I can't concentrate like you were talking about before. But I think going through the exercise with you from the book would open a lot of people's eyes to a lot of things. Just letting your mind wander and see who comes to you and see what happens. What are they going to ask you? What are you going to talk about? I mean, I think that in itself is very amazing. And I can't wait to do it. I just didn't have time beforehand. Otherwise, I would have explained it here. But I think, there's so many things in the book. There are spells. There are all kinds of things. Opening a circle for Brigid magic. And I mean, the book is jam-packed full of stuff. And it's really, really good.
It says a total stuff show. Lots of things.
It's like the one-stop shop, It's perfect. So okay, here's the question. Why do you believe that it's beneficial for us to work with deity?
Oh, because they're old and they know things that we don't.
That's a good answer, and it's probably about the truest one. Yeah.
I think of it this way. I mean, if one of us had access to a human being who had lived for 5,000 years, what lengths would we go to spend an hour with them to ask them what they know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, would anyone turn that down? Well, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. We don't have that. But what we do have are the living memories of human experience, and those experiences, those pieces of human spirit, the moments of triumph, the moments of great sorrow, the moments of great pain, the more difficult, complicated stuff of the human condition, and the more loving and constructive and healing parts of human existence. Those are all of those things make up these beings that we call the gods. And it's like I often use the example of the Buddhist goddess Kuan Yin, who is what they say, like, she's an ascended master of, and I'm not really well versed in Buddhism, so those if I'm screwing up the terminology, please forgive me. But she is the collection of all the greatest moments of human compassion, of having sympathy and kindness for your fellow human being when the times were so tough that the very easiest thing to do would be cruel and choosing kindness anyway. So she's a collection of all of those moments throughout human history, and that is who makes up Kuan Yin. Brigid, I feel like, is a combination of moments of greatness when humans are looking out for each other and trying to make their worlds better places. Because she is the goddess of revolutionary technology, the smith, the iron working. That is something that we do not have a comparison anytime probably the last 1,000, 2,000 years as to what iron did for human culture. What we can't even comprehend the changes it made in the way humans live. And she's a goddess of that. And she's a goddess of medicine that dramatically improves the lives of people. And she's a goddess of great charity. So all of those moments of really striving to make this world better for other people and for ourselves in a way that is kind, compassionate, and sustainable for this planet. And it hasn't always been that way, but we're really trying. That is what makes up Brigid. And so she has lived through thousands of years of people trying very, very hard to make this world a better place. And so she is a conscious, breathing entity that has experienced all of that. So if that's the kind of, if you're one that wants to make your world better for other people, she's one to talk to because she's seen it all. You know?
Exactly. Just got another question from chat. And they would like me to ask you what would Brigid use as a circle of protection, like most Wiccans use salt?
Probably the fiery rays of the sun.
I like that. Oh, yeah.
A sword.
A whole bunch of swords in a big circle.
She could shoot fire from her skull. She would emit a loud scream that would frighten away the enemies. So, I don't actually use salt in my circles. Maybe I should, but I don't. I would say, I don't know what kind of magic this person is doing, but I would say anything that really involves fire. It could be a circle of candles. Be careful. Don't wear long drapey robes I'm wagging my finger at my computer screen right now. Don't wear long robes if you're using a candlelit ritual. Better go naked. But any sort of tool in your tradition that represents fire. For me, that would be a wand. Also, swords are good too, because she is the iron worker, and iron was believed by the ancient Celts to ward off evil. So I would say either one of those tools. Hope that was helpful.
It is. And that leads into another thing that I was going to bring up, because you talk in the book about Brigid's cross for protection for the home, and they're easy to come by, and they're not so difficult to make. And I'm going to say, see chapter 8 in the book, because it'll teach you how.
Yeah, with cleaners, because I'm just that crafty. I can't do it with reeds, guys. Sorry, but I live in New York City. But I got pipe cleaners. I got them at the 99-cent store. So
yeah, and that works, because I tried to do one with pipe cleaners not long ago. But you also include a prayer to enchant the cross. And, okay, let it be known I'm not the craftiest of people. So last Imbolc, I went to YouTube for instructions on how to make one. Because, sometimes it's easier to watch rather than to read, something. And I was completely put to shame by young children who could put together one in the blink of an eye.
Oh.
So I bought one. Actually, I just, this is not good. But let's talk about Brigid's cross. I mean, where did it come from? How did it turn into that?
Gosh, where it came from? It's been such a. I'm staring at this large copper one right now. I mean, it's been part of cultural practice for so long. I have no idea where it was first made, but it was made out of rushes. Usually on Imbolc, and that would the St. Brigid crosses were put up in the beams of the roofs, which were made of thrush, so they were easily they were thatched roofs, so they could easily catch fire. So the idea of putting them in the rafters was to say, Brigid, protect this house from famine and fire. Asking the goddess of plenty and also a goddess of springtime and fire, because it's one of the things that she has control over, she was also able to protect the house from it. Later that they were moved to the mantle or hung over the door. I think traditionally sometimes people would write down names and stick them into the crosses. And I think in some practices they were burned every year at Imbolc, and then new ones were made. So it was an idea of removing any of the bad luck from the previous year, and then starting the year fresh.
That's a great idea, because it would suck it up. It makes sense to me. So that would be, a good thing to have around the house, just to make yourself feel a little bit more protected, a little safer, and especially when you make one or you buy one, even just do the prayer that's in your book to kind of enchant the cross and give it a little life there, and I think that's a really neat thing to do.
No, I'm very glad.
Now, time is getting short, so this might be a good time to talk to everybody about what you're up to in the coming months, and perhaps maybe some things that people in the New York area can take part in.
Well, yes, I'm really excited because I'm going to be on the road over the next couple of months. Going to different places. I'm going to be up in June. Actually, I'm going to be. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm going to pull up my list. If people don't mind, so I know exactly what I'm talking about.
That's always a good thing.
I know. I should have been better prepared. My apologies. Okay, so if you're in New York tomorrow night, it's my official New York City Brigid book release party at Catland Books, which is at 987 Flushing Avenue in Brooklyn at 7 p.m. It is free, with hopes that you're going to buy a book. There will be bourbon, ginger, apple cocktails, and I'll be reading, and we'll have some music. We'll even have some dancing, and probably some bobbing for apples later. For friends that are in Georgia, I'm going to be at the Phoenix and the Dragon bookstore on June 11th at 7 p.m. And I will also be at Simple Strands in Cummings, Georgia on June 13th. On the 20th of June, I'll be in New Hampshire at the Christopher Penzak's Temple of Witchcraft. So I'm looking forward to that. On July 27th, I'm going to be at Bell Book and Candle in Dover, Delaware, which is a wonderful store in the middle of Dover. And then in August, I'm going to be at Harvest Gathering in Connecticut, which is basically my home festival. It's where I first started teaching, and I get back about every other year. And I'm looking forward to being back, because I wasn't there last year. And then on August 27th, I'm going to Asheville, North Carolina. I'll be at the Raven and the Crone. And then on September 13th, I'm going back to Portland, Oregon, and we'll be at the Columbia Willamette Valley Pagan Pride Day. And hopefully some other places. I'm working on trying to get some time in Detroit, and also blogging quite a bit, doing a lot of activism quite a bit. And I have one other secret surprise project that I will be announcing tomorrow night at a book release party, followed by then announcing it online. I know. So you either have to come to a book release party, or you have to wait until Saturday, when then I'll post the announcement on social media.
Sounds exciting, and and I really want to thank you for taking time, because your broom is going to get a way big workout over the next few months. So good that I
got to tune it up. You got to get ready to go.
You got to get it tuned up.
Get ready to fly.
Yeah, but it is, it's ecologically safe and sane, and a great way to go, because you don't have any traffic jams.
I ride a hybrid broom.
There you go. So where can people buy the book, real quick?
You can buy it on the Wiser website. You can buy it at probably check your local metaphysical store first. And if you can't find it there, you can get it on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and Powell's. But again, support your local stores first. And then if you can't do it, then go to the big guys. And
have you got a Facebook page, and have you got a website?
Yes, my website is thecocowitch.com, TheCocowitch. I live in Facebook. You can just Google Courtney Weber, and that's where I'll be. I also live in Twitter. You can find me there at The Cocoa Witch. And I blog at witchesandpagans.com. My blog is called Behind the Broom, What the Books Don't Tell You. And I just actually had something up on Patheos Pagan that came out today. And then also something that came out in Huffington Post regarding the future of paganism appeared just about an hour ago. So I am all over your computer. Come hang out with me. Don't let me be lonely.
Yay, we will. Well, thank you. I really, really thank you for coming in. I mean, there was so much to talk about in so little time, and there's so much that we left out, but we got a good start at it.
Thank you, Marla. I really appreciate you having me.
So you hang on the line for a second. We'll thank you properly when we're done, but we have to thank everybody for listening in tonight in all those foreign countries and here locally and live here in the chat room. And we will see you next week. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.